In my algebra class, we did lesson 11 today, and it was really short and sweet because my class also had a quiz today. I don't know any other algebra teachers that have a quiz today, but hopefully you can keep up with your own teacher in regards to that. But we did as much of the lesson as we can, and here were the goals for that lesson. So we were graphing quadratic functions from the factor form. And there's a bunch of things to notice, but in the factor form, we were mostly just looking at equations that look something like this. And maybe something like this. Yesterday in lesson 10, we learned how to estimate the zeros or the y-intercepts from the factor form. So you need that to be able to sketch your graph. Table 7, can you tell me what the zeros would be from this first random example I made? -3 is one of them. Table 7, can you tell me the other one? +2. So, and of course, there can be other ways that don't necessarily apply to this, like you could have factor form that looks something like this, right? This method of just looking at it and that's your zero just with an opposite sign, that only works when it looks like this, okay? You can't just look at this one and be like, oh yeah, one of my zeros is going to be a positive one because there's now a number in front of the X. I'll show you how to tackle stuff like that later, but I could tell you the other zero would be -2 because it is in this format, right? If you look at it, give it the opposite sign, that's one of your zeros. The other one, like this example, you should still be able to calculate the zeros the same way. So table 1, can you tell me what the zeros are for this one? -4 is one of them. Do you know what the other one will be? No. Anyone know what the other one would be? Not -2 because it's not x plus 2, like it's not in the same format. Try. It's going to be 0. Romina said it up here. Now I will show you one day, because the learning targets aren't there yet. I will show you one day why it's 0. But when it's like this, where it's like a single term times a 2 term, it will be 0, and then it will be the opposite of that sign. And that's like the level that we're looking at today. One day I will teach you how to find the 0 of that one. But right now, we're looking at problems like this in the factor form, how to graph them. So when you graph your zeros, what's another word for zeros? X-intercepts, good. So if I identify my zeros as -3 and 2, that means you have an X-intercept on the -3 and on the +2. What we learned today, because today we added the skill of now finding your vertex from the factored form. We're all paying attention, especially if you haven't had the lesson yet. To find the vertex of our factor form is to identify our zeros and then find like the middle of them. So what would be the middle of -3 and 2? 0.5, good. So if that math is like hard for you to do, you kind of just take the average of them. -3 plus 2, and then you'll divide that by 2. What's -3 plus 2? -1, and then -1 divided by 2 is -0.5. That means my middle of my zeros is -0.5, like right here. So my x value of my vertex, which vertex would be like your turning point of the graph. When it's in factor form, I know it's -0.5. to find the y value of my vertex, I now plug it into my equation and solve. So even though we don't usually write the y's, this is still equal to y, this is equal to the output. So if I were to plug in negative 0.5 into my equation, negative 0.5 plus 3, and negative 0.5 minus 2. What's negative 0.5 plus 3? $2.5. What's negative 0.5 minus 2? Or you can use a calculator. Negative 2.5. I'm also just checking it too, but that's what I estimated it to be anyway. Yep, negative 2.5. And then multiply those together, negative 2.5 times 2.5. Is negative 6.25. That is how I can get my y value of my vertex. Once I know what the x value is, I plug it in and solve. And this is all without graphing. I'm very aware that you could use Desmos and answer what the x-intercepts are and answer what the vertex is. But know that on your tests, this is what we're gearing you up for. We're going to give you the zeros and the vertex and ask you for the equation. So then now Desmos isn't helping you. It's not telling you the equation. You have to figure that out based on everything that you're practicing. So that's why it's important. Yeah, use Desmos to double check, is this my vertex? Before you put your final answer in, but you should be practicing this without it. Okay. So let's look at this one now. One more example. What's the middle point of -4 and 0? Good, -2. That math is easier to do. -4 plus 0 is -4 divided by 2. I know my x value of my vertex is -2. For my y value, remember this is equal to y. I plug in -2 for my x and solve. So then it's 2 times -2 over here, and in parentheses over here, it's -2 plus 4. What is -2 plus 4? A +2. And then I still have this over here. What's 2 times -2? And then what's -4 times 2? And now I have my y value of my vertex. All without graphing, although, yeah, use a graph to check your answer. I also showed everyone how to find it from standard form 2, but I don't think you'll see that on the practice today. And I don't want to overwhelm you. I know I just gave some people a lot of new information. But there's also a way to find it from standard form, and I will make sure to show you that one day, but for right now, we're doing it from factor form. So I'm gonna leave this up as an example, but since you're all here, I am holding you to getting 80% or higher on lesson 11 practice. And then that's usually the minimum requirement for getting, some free time after that, but some of you still need to resubmit your coloring sheet. Remember, that's a grade in math lab and algebra, so you really want to do that first. And maybe even go for the extra credit on that. So I don't know, decide what's more important, if you watching that YouTube video or playing that game, or are you getting good grades? Which one will matter more in the future? So for number 1, you had to select all true statements about a graph represented by this expression. So, and I'll do it the way that the lesson intended, which is without using a graphing calculator. Of course, you could type it in Desmos exactly how it looks and get the answers. but we do need you to know how to do things without it. Remember, you don't get Desmos on your state testing, so you do have to know how to do things without Desmos. Of course, you can always rent your own graphing calculator from the bookstore, stop talking. Find something else to do that doesn't involve talking. You could get one from the bookstore free of charge as long as you don't lose it for your state testing, and it can graph things like this for you. But remember, you don't get Desmos on your state testing. So first thing it's asking about are the x-intercepts, otherwise known as your zeros. Based on this expression, table 2, can you tell me one of the zeros? $11, good, so one of my zeros is gonna be 11. Table 3, can you tell me what the other one will be? Based off this expression. It means like this, but based off this expression. You know, one of the zeros is 11, what's the other one? It's not gonna be 2. Table 4. It is gonna be 0. In algebra, I haven't yet taught you how to necessarily figure that out yet, algebraically. We've just been looking at patterns that we've recognized. And what we saw in some of our notes, and I'll even show you from lesson 10, is that if it had a single term times a 2 term, that one of the x-intercepts was 0. So let me just show you that so you know I'm not just like randomly making it up. Here's lesson 10 notes. All right, so yesterday when we looked at all those different graphs, or some of you were supposed to do it yourself, if you had it sub. But we saw that on the expression where it was just like one term times a 2 term. The other one was 0 for the x-intercept. For function I as well, when I had a 1 term times a 2 term, the other x-intercept was 0. So if you just see that, for right now, just know that it's going to be 0. You'll see why in a later lesson. That is not our goal today, so I'm not necessarily teaching you it yet. But that's what you need to know. So for this first part, the x-intercepts are 0 and 11. For the next thing it's asking about is that it has only one x-intercept. Would you agree with that? What's another name for zeros? So do I have just one x-intercept? No, I have 2, so you don't pick this option. When we cross these out, so obviously you can only have for quadratics at most 2 x-intercepts, so it's 11 and 0, that means those ones can't be right. It does not have just one. Now for our x coordinate of the vertex, you need to think about what the middle point is between 0 and 11. So think about it, don't say it out loud yet. But if my zeros are 0 and 11, I have a point at 0 on the x. And then a point at 11. And what we know about our U-shaped graphs is our vertex is a turning point. It should be somewhere between 0 and 11. And we learned today that it's like the halfway point. So what's the halfway point between 0 and 11? 5.5 is correct. So that's why it should be this answer. And if that math is hard for you to figure out what the middle point is, Average them, 11 plus 0 is 11, divided by 2 is 5.5. All right, well, I'm gonna make sure the key is right, so it should have just been those two, and it is just those two. Questions on that? Okay, questions on others? Keegan? Number 3 on the page. Time is one. So we have to determine the x coordinate of the vertex of the graph that represents each equation. Again, you could always use Desmos to check your answer, but the whole point is to try to do it without graphing, so that's how I'm gonna show it to you right now. So you have to first, from factor form is what these all are in, identify your zeros. So what are my zeros for this first one? Table 5, can you tell me? Two and 0, good. 2 because it's gonna be the opposite of this one, so when it's in this format, x plus or minus a number, then it's gonna be like the opposite of that second number. And it's just flagging the time today. Anyway, it's always like the opposite if it's in that format, so that's why we have a positive 2. And then if it's just a single term times the 2 term, that other 0 is gonna be 0. Now think about what the halfway point between 0 and 2 would be. 1 is correct. Or average out the x values, 2 plus 0 is 2, divided by 2 is 1. So you should have just typed in a 1 on that one. Table 6. For this one, what are my zeros? Okay, good. Now, think about the middle point between these. Granted, at some point it gets hard to figure out the middle point. So that's where you should probably just average them. 4 plus -5 and then divide that by 2. What's 4 plus -5? Asking all of you. And then -1 divided by 2 is -0.5 is what our x value of our vertex will be. It's not asking about the whole vertex, right? It's just asking about the x value. In the last one, table 7, can you tell me what the zeros are for this expression? Question or answer? Okay, so give us a minute to think. So table 7, we're asking you to find the zeros or x-intercepts of this equation. 3 is one of them.
And 0.
And 0. Okay, so, and I'll show you this formally in another lesson, but think of like the word zeros. You have to think what will make this expression 0. What value for x will do that? 3 minus 3 would give me a 0 in that one. Anything times 0 is 0, so if you make this one a 0, then that will make that side 0. Okay, so these are my zeros. Now think, what's the middle point between 0 and 3? 1.5. And that's how you find the x value of your vertex from your zeros, from your factor form. Questions on that? I'm gonna show these answers so I can make sure the P is right. Okay, yep, let me make sure that it accepts that middle one a bunch of different ways. Doesn't look like it's accepting all the ways. So I need to add a couple more answers, because you could put it without the zero, and it'll be right, so give me 1 second.
Okay. So that was 1 negative 0.5 and 1.5. Okay, so if you typed this in, it'll now mark it right. It'll just probably take a while. If you're not in my algebra class, then tell me, I'll just fix it on yours. I don't want to have to go into all the algebra classes and do that, but that was number 3. All right, questions on this one? Questions on other things? Mujmel, sorry, he had his hand up. Number 5. Okay. So match the correct answers to the description using the following equation. All right. So we want just the x-intercepts, which I think there's 2. So I wonder if it accepts 2 different options. But based on this factored form, what's my x-intercepts? Table 4, can you tell me? 2 and 4. I don't think it should matter which one you put first, because it didn't specify. Hold on. It shouldn't matter, because it didn't say to put like the lowest one first or something, but we have 2 x-intercepts because of the way these are formatted. You know, it's gonna be the opposite symbol. And that's what makes it 0. 2 minus 2 would be 0, 4 minus 4 would be 0. All right, now my y-intercept. The only way we've learned so far how to find the y-intercept from factored form is to distribute this out or FOIL it, whatever you want to call it, and simplify and then look at it. So if we distribute table 4 with x times x, table 5 with x times -4, and then we're going to distribute now this term. Table 6 with -2 times x. And table 7, -2 times -4. So we're distributing right here, -2 times -4. Positive. All right, when you combine like terms, you get the standard form, which is x squared minus 6x plus 8. And in yesterday's lesson, we learned that when it's in standard form, that single number, that constant, is going to be your y-intercept. All right, that's just something we observed yesterday when we did the activity. So know that now moving forward, if it's in standard form, you can see the y-intercept because it's always that single number, the one that's not attached to any variables. So 8 is our y-intercept. Question so far? Now for this one, you are plugging in whatever they're asking you. So when x is 1, what's the y? You can plug it into either form. So like, I'll plug this one into my factor form. So when I plug in 1, it's 1 minus 2 and 1 minus 4. Class with 1 minus 2. Good. And then 1 minus 4. And when I multiply these, I get what's -1 times -3. A positive 3. So that's what you do.
Now, for when y is -1, what is x? I probably for this one would not plug into the factor form because then you'd have to solve for the two x's, like, and you probably end up having to multiply these out anyway. So for this one, I would plug it into the standard form. And in that case, we are doing -1 equals x squared minus 6x plus 8. Let me think, what would be? I'm trying to give you guys an easy way, but I'm not seeing it right now. That would be easy. So then my suggestion for this one would be to probably just graph it and then see where it touches on the graph. So I'm gonna do that. X squared minus 6x plus 8. And you can do the other form too. It should give you the same exact graph, no matter which one you plug in. But it wants to know when y is -1, y would be -1 here. What's my value for the x? So that is how I'm choosing to answer that one. By looking at the graph. All right, I didn't know that that would end up being my, vertex. Cause then I would have been able to do it without graphing, but that's how you can tell, that's how you can check your answer. Questions on that one? Let me make sure the key is right. And it is. All right, Bella, you said number 2, right? Okay. I'll try to squeeze that in. When the bell rings, you guys are definitely welcome to go. But if you want number 2, then stick around. So select all equations whose graph has a vertex with an x coordinate of 2. I'm going to show you without using graphing technology. So first you have to find the zeros of all of them. What would be my zeros of this first one that's on my list? Okay, good. What's my middle way between 2 and 4? So my x value of my vertex would be 3. And if you have no clue how I'm getting that, just average these together. 2 plus 4 is 6, divided by 2 is 3. So you're not gonna pick this one. We're looking for ones that have a vertex with x coordinate of 2. So then what are my zeros of this one? 2 and -2. What's my middle way between those two numbers? So then that's also not going to be the answer. What are my zeros for this one? Okay, good. What's the middle way between 1 and 3? So this one will be one of my answers. What are my zeros for this one? -4 is one of them, 0 is the other. What's the middle way between -4 and 0? -2, so still not an answer. Down here, what are my zeros? Okay, good. What's the middle way between 4 and 0? So here's my 2 answers. Have a good day. See you guys later. Just